question: do you have a coping strategy? How do you deal with challenging, difficult, stressful times? Last week was a very challenging time for me emotionally, right? We were in the beginning of some key project and we're wrapping up other key projects. Those two things are often very stressful for me personally. I saw that. And when I was going to the middle of that, I had to lean on, a set of different behaviors, processes, tricks to get through it because there is no avoiding them. And that kind of reminded me of this idea of coping. Every time you hear the word coping in pop culture now, the tendency is to think of that in a very negative light, right? People think of coping as a negative thing. So you might hear things like doomscrolling or, drugs or alcohol consumption or overworking. And those are all attached to the term coping. So subconsciously, every time the word coping comes up, we go to like, oh, this is a negative thing. But coping in itself is not a negative thing. The mechanism can be negative, right? But coping is basically the way you deal with internal and external pressures that you can't remove yourself from immediately. So somebody who is in a challenging work situation where maybe their boss is abusive or they don't like the work anymore, but they still need the money, may need to find a way to cope. A leader or founder who is building through very difficult times where, maybe the business is not cash flowing properly, they find they need to cope. A leader who is potentially dealing with, a divorce or the healthcare of a child while still needing to show up to work every single day needs to cope, right? We all go through situations that are so intense that we can't get rid of them. And because we cannot get rid of them, we need to find a way to survive whilst we actually go through the entire process. That is what coping does. Coping allows you to deal with the hard times. It's a stress management strategy. The problem is a lot of us never think about this intentionally. A lot of us never really have a coping or recovery strategy. We only run to the things that are immediately accessible, aka numbing, right? So you run to doom scrolling because you don't have an alternative strategy for how to deal with stress. You run to maybe drugs, alcohol, because there is no other intentional way that you have created, no intentional protocol you've created to deal with those times. So what makes a bad coping mechanism? What makes a good coping mechanism? A few things. One, the most important question is, whatever you're choosing for the short-term relief, does it leave negative consequences, right? Let's talk about drugs, for example. When you take drugs, you do get temporary relief from whatever it is that you're dealing with, right? It's a distraction, but it creates a sense of dependency. It alters your psychology, your neurology in a way that keeps you dependent on that habit for you to keep surviving. When you overwork, right? Yeah, you get temporary escape and temporary relief from whatever is causing the stress, but you now create a health deficit that you're going to pay for much down later down the line. So the number one thing about coping mechanisms and assessing them is, one, does it actually leave negative dependencies? Two, does it create more agency after the fact, right? So same thing. If you take drugs or you overwork, you don't have the ability to act after that episode is over, right? So for 10, 15, 20 minutes, you can distract yourself. But once that is done, you actually find yourself in a place where you have less agency, you have less ability to function, right? So when you're picking coping mechanisms, you have to really think about the second order consequence of that particular choice. It's not just that it can offer you relief in the moment, it's that it can also give you the opportunity for recovery and sustenance over the long haul. So if you pick something that damages you, even after it's giving you relief, that is a negative coping mechanism. That is the thing that you need to avoid. And coping is also, so what do positive coping mechanisms look like? One is physical relief, right? So this is the typical health wellness thing that people will talk about. So walking, exercising, journaling, writing. For me, breathing, meditation has been huge because meditation allows me to almost observe whatever is happening in my brain without attaching myself to it. And that gives me a way to not brood, right? So meditation has been huge. Yoga has also been really great for me, just physical movement. So going for walks, exercising is also great. So that is writing, journaling. So that's a combination of physical / mental activities that allows you to manage the stress, right? Social coping, right? So hanging out with friends, connections, talking to people, having conversations, that's also proven to actually really help you manage the process of, dealing with whatever it is that you're dealing with whilst, you can't actually do anything about it, right? So mental, journaling, writing, physical, exercise, walking, moving, social, hanging out with friends, having connections, those are all coping mechanisms. Now, you need to create a protocol. And this is where it's really, really difficult, because even for myself, I'm still in the early stages of like really working through proper coping protocols, because there are times where I still run to the negative things, doom scrolling, just numbing, but you need to have a protocol of like, okay, when I do hit a particular situation, when I have this trigger, here are the set of steps I'm taking to actually get me through that, and try to follow that protocol every single time until it becomes a habit, it becomes a default response. And it's not an easy thing to do, but you have to, because otherwise you find yourself in positions where you keep yourself in this vicious cycle, right? Things happen, you get stressed out, then you cope negatively, and then you reduce your ability for agency. So the impact of the thing happening the next time is worse. And then you go to the cycle again, which leads me to the last part of this idea. Coping is not the same as recovery. Those are two separate things. Coping is a management system, but eventually you need to go deal with the source of the stressor, right? Coping is handling the symptoms because there's nothing you can do about it in the moment, but it's not a long-term strategy. It's a short-term management strategy. Long-term, you need to eventually get rid of what the symptom is. You need to get rid of the root cause. You need to remove yourself from the environment, remove yourself from the relationship. You eventually need to find solutions to that revenue issue. You need to decide whether you're going to close down the business, keep it running, because your body can only handle so much. This is why sometimes very perfectly healthy people will drop dead or will fall sick and nobody understands, right? Because your body physically reacts to stress. It stores mental stress, and if it's not processed, if it's not let out in any single way, it's going to be beaten down. And there's only so much coping you can do to offset your stresses, right? So whilst you need a coping strategy, an even better strategy is you need to have a long-term plan to get rid of the stressor itself. Otherwise, you're not going to have any sustainable growth in whatever area it is that you're dealing with, right? And I think this is very crucial, because as leaders and builders who are doing difficult things, you deal with stress more than the average person, more than your employees. And unless you have a strategy to actually manage that, unless you have coping protocols that are healthy and helpful, you will find yourself in vicious cycles that over time will deplete your ability to keep doing what you're doing in the best way possible. I hope this helps. I'll see you around. Cheers.